We weren't afraid when we set out. It was supposed to be a 3-day hike, deep in the Cascade Mountains. A last hurrah before life pulled us in different directions: grad school, jobs, relationships. There were 6 of us: me, Brian, Sam, Jess, Daniel, and Eric. We'd all known each other since college, bonded over cheap beer and late-night cram sessions. This was our tradition: one big trip every summer, somewhere wild, somewhere real. We parked the car near the trailhead, the road behind us vanishing into dense evergreens. The air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. The sun sat high, filtering through the canopy in golden slants. We checked our gear, slung on our packs, and started walking. The first few hours were easy. The trail wound through thick forest, the path packed from other hikers before us. We joked, talked about everything and nothing. Eric had a new girlfriend, Jess was thinking about moving to Seattle, Brian had quit his job without telling anyone. The usual. By late afternoon, the trail narrowed, and the trees thickened. We were far from any roads now, miles from cell service. That was the appeal: no distractions, no responsibilities. Just us, the wild, and the silence. We made camp near a small stream, pitching our tents in a clearing. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, the temperature dropped fast. We built a fire, cooked instant noodles, and passed around a flask of whiskey. That first night we weren't scared. Not yet. The night settled in around us, thick and absolute. The fire crackled, sending twisting embers into the black sky. We talked and laughed, but as the flames burned lower, a quietness crept in. Out here, there was no background noise, no cars, no hum of electricity, no distant voices. Just the wind in the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Jess shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "It's too quiet," she murmured. "City girl problems?" Eric teased, nudging her with his boot. "Welcome to nature." But I knew what she meant. It wasn't just quiet, it was expectant, like the forest was holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond the reach of our firelight, I swore I heard something. A whisper. Faint. Almost human. I turned toward the sound, heart skipping. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Sam asked, yawning. I waited. The whisper didn't come again. "Nothing," I said finally, shaking it off. "Just the wind." Had to be. One by one, we crawled into our tents, zipping them up against the cold. The fire burned to embers, and darkness swallowed the clearing whole. I lay awake for a long time, listening. At some point, I must have drifted off. But just before sleep took me, I thought I heard it again, closer this time. A breath. A whisper. Right outside my tent. I woke to the sound of birds. The pale light of dawn seeped through my tent fabric, the chill of morning clinging to the air. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. Something was wrong. The fire pit was cold, our gear untouched, but one tent was missing. Sam's. I frowned, rubbing my arms against the cold. "Hey, where's Sam?" Brian emerged from his tent, stretching. "What?" "Sam's tent is gone." Eric stumbled out next, still half asleep. "Maybe he packed up early? Taking a morning piss or something?" But his gear was gone too. His pack. His boots. Like he'd never been here at all. That's when Jess stepped out of her tent, eyes wide, hair a mess. Did anyone hear him leave?" None of us had. Panic started creeping in, slow but insistent. We called his name, searched the clearing, checked the tree line. No footprints. No sign of struggle. "Maybe he went ahead," Brian suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. We followed the trail forward for a mile, yelling for him, but there was nothing. No tracks. No answers. By noon, the fear had settled deep in my gut. People didn't just vanish. Not like this. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. We spent hours searching. Brian insisted Sam must have gotten turned around, that he'd find his way back. But we all knew that didn't make sense. His gear was gone. His tent was gone. And yet, there were no signs he had packed up. No rustled dirt, no boot prints. It was like he had been plucked out of existence. Jess wanted to turn back. We need to go back to the car. Now. Hike out. Get help. But Brian shook his head. It's another full day back. If Sam's lost out here, every hour counts. We argued for a while, the tension raw, exhaustion gnawing at the edges of our nerves. In the end, we decided to keep moving forward, thinking maybe, just maybe, he had gone ahead and we'd catch up. By the time we made camp that night, no one was laughing anymore. No one told jokes. No one passed around the whiskey. We built a bigger fire this time, the flames snapping high, throwing long shadows against the trees. Nobody wanted to say it, but we all felt it. The woods weren't empty. I kept scanning the darkness, every snapped twig sending a jolt through my chest. Jess huddled close, arms wrapped around her knees. Then Eric spoke, voice low. Last night, I thought I heard something. I turned to him sharply. What? He hesitated. Like a voice. But not close. Just far off. My throat went dry. What did it say? I don't know. He stared at the fire. But it sounded like it was calling my name. The fire crackled between us. No one slept easily that night. And in the morning Daniel was gone. Daniel's tent was still there. But he wasn't in it. His pack, his boots, his jacket, everything was exactly where he had left it. Except him. Jess was the first to panic. She clawed at his tent, throwing his things aside as if he might somehow be buried under them. Daniel! She screamed into the trees. Daniel, where are you? No answer. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Just like Sam. Eric's face had gone pale. Brian stood stiff, jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. This doesn't make sense, Eric said finally. People don't just disappear. There'd be something. There'd be tracks. Unless someone took him. Jess's voice was barely a whisper. Brian ran his hands through his hair, looking up at the sky like it might give him answers. Maybe he went for water. Maybe. No, I cut in. His boots are still here. No one walks barefoot in the woods at night. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. We were too far in to turn back now. We had no service, no GPS. It would take a full day to reach the car, and then what? Report them missing? Tell the authorities that our friends had vanished into thin air? Jess was shaking. We should leave. Now. Brian exhaled sharply through his nose but didn't argue. He was scared too. We packed up fast, stuffing our things into our bags with frantic hands. The moment we stepped onto the trail, I felt it. Something was watching us. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. We hiked fast, barely speaking, the forest pressing in around us. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent my pulse skyrocketing. Eric led the way, constantly checking the map, his hands trembling. Jess stayed close to me, her breathing uneven. Brian was behind us, scanning the trees like he expected something, someone, to step out at any second. By midday, the fear had turned into something worse, doubt. This isn't right, Eric muttered, stopping to look at the map again. What do you mean? Jess asked, voice tight. Eric turned in a slow circle, eyes narrowing. This should be the trail we came in on, but I don't recognize anything. Brian groaned, rubbing his temples. You're just stressed. We stick to the path, we'll hit the car by sunset. Eric didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the trees. Finally, he said, We should have passed the river by now. My stomach dropped. He was right. On the hike in, we had crossed a wide, fast-moving river about 5 miles from the trailhead. But now, after hours of walking, we hadn't seen or heard it. Brian shook his head. We must have taken a wrong turn. We'll backtrack. A sound cut him off. A whisper. I whipped around, heart hammering. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, low and distant. Not the wind. Not an animal. A voice. A voice saying my name. Jess grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. Tell me you heard that. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Eric took a slow step back. We need to move. We didn't run, but we walked fast, too fast, tripping over roots and rocks, barely keeping our balance. The whispering followed us. And as the sun dipped below the trees, we realized something horrible. We weren't getting closer to the trailhead. We were going deeper into the forest. We stopped when we couldn't see our hands in front of our faces. The forest at night was absolute. No light, no horizon, just the oppressive black pressing in from all sides. Our headlamps cast in, trembling beams that barely seemed to cut through the dark. We're lost, Jess said, hugging herself. We're so fucking lost. Eric looked sick. We've been walking in circles. I don't know how, but we have. Brian exhaled sharply through his nose. We stay put until morning. Keep a fire going. We'll find our way at first light. No one argued. We were exhausted, scared, and pushing forward blindly would only make things worse. We built a fire, bigger than the last one. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt it. Fire meant safety. Fire meant light. Eric was the first to nod off, slumped against his pack. Brian poked at the flames, jaw tight. Jess sat beside me, her whole body tense. She leaned in close and whispered, Do you feel it? I swallowed hard. Feel what? She didn't answer right away. Then, barely breathing. We're not alone. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. The light from the fire barely reached the first row of trunks. Beyond that, just blackness. Then I saw it. A shape, just at the edge of the light. Too tall. Too still. Watching. I sucked in a breath, grabbed Jess's wrist, and pointed. Do you see that? She did. Her fingers tightened around my arm, but before either of us could speak, Brian stood up. Did you hear that? A whisper, drifting from the trees. Then another. Then another. Voices. Our names. And from the darkness, something stepped closer. Brian grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it toward the trees. Who's there? He shouted. The figure didn't move. It stood just beyond the reach of the firelight, featureless in the dark. A trick of the shadows, maybe, except Jess and I had both seen it. The whispering grew louder. Not from one voice. Many. The sound circled us, curling between the trees, slipping into the gaps between the crackling flames. Our names. Soft, coaxing. I felt it in my bones. A pull. Eric jolted awake, blinking in confusion. What's happening? Stay by the fire, I said quickly. Jess squeezed my arm, her voice a tight thread of panic. It's getting closer. She was right. The figure at the tree line shifted. Not a step. Not a lunge. Just a sudden wrongness, like it had been closer the whole time and I hadn't noticed. I dug my nails into my palm, forcing myself to breathe. My instincts screamed to run. But run where? We were already lost. Brian swung the torch again. Who the fuck are you? The whispering stopped. Silence crushed in, thick as the night itself. Then, in a voice that did not belong in this world, it whispered back. Sam. My blood turned to ice. Jess let out a choke sound. Eric grabbed my wrist like he was drowning. That was Sam's voice. Soft. Weak. Like he was standing right there in the dark, just out of reach. Help me, the voice pleaded. Please. I'm so cold. Brian took a step forward. Sam? No. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back hard. That's not him. The fire snapped, throwing embers into the night. And in that flash of light, the figure smiled. A wide, gaping grin of something that wasn't human. And the fire went out. The fire died in an instant, as if snuffed out by an unseen hand. We were swallowed by darkness. Jess screamed. I felt her fingers claw at my arm, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Eric cursed, fumbling for his flashlight. Brian was shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words over the deafening silence, the kind that pressed against your ears, thick and smothering. I scrambled for my own headlamp, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The moment I flicked it on, the weak beam cut through the dark and landed on something standing right in front of us. I barely had time to process what I was seeing. Too tall. Too thin. Limbs stretching in the wrong places, like they'd been pulled and reshaped by something that didn't understand human anatomy. The skin was black, not in color, but in absence, as if it wasn't made of flesh at all, but of the void itself. Its head twitched at the sudden light. The mouth, too wide, too full of teeth, twisted into something like a grin. Then it moved. Not a lunge. Not a step. It blinked. One moment it was at the tree line. The next, inches from Brian. Brian didn't even have time to scream. A horrible sound, like wet fabric tearing, filled the night. Then he was gone. No struggle. No trace. Just gone. Jess sobbed, stumbling backward. Eric was whispering, "No, no, no," over and over, like a broken record. My own pulse thundered in my ears, but I couldn't move. The thing didn't follow Brian. It didn't even look at where he had been. It turned toward us instead. And it laughed. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't even close. That laughter slithered through the dark, low and wet, like something with too many throats. It didn't echo. It just existed, wrapping around us, sinking under our skin. Then it moved again. Not walked. Not ran. Just blinked forward. Jess screamed. Eric yanked my arm. "Run!" We ran. I don't remember making the decision. 1 second, I was frozen in place, lungs locked, heart hammering. The next, my feet were pounding against the dirt, shoving through the undergrowth, tearing through the trees. Branches lashed at my face. My pack dragged at my shoulders. Somewhere behind me, Jess was sobbing, her breathing ragged. Eric cursed as he tripped, then scrambled back up. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. That laughter followed us, slipping between the trees, always close, too close. We weren't escaping. We weren't outrunning it. It was playing with us. The forest blurred into an endless, shifting maze. No landmarks. No trail. Just more trees, more dark, more of those whispers. Then, Eric screamed. I turned just in time to see something snatch him. No struggle. No sound beyond that first, choked yell. One moment, he was there. The next, nothing. I stumbled, fell hard against the dirt. My palms scraped raw. Jess grabbed my jacket, yanking me up. I turned, and saw it. Just a few feet away. Too tall. Too thin. That grin? And then, in a voice that didn't belong to it, "Keep running." Jess pulled me forward. I listened. We ran until our bodies gave out. Until our legs refused to move, until our lungs burned like fire, until Jess collapsed against a tree, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I dropped beside her, hands shaking violently. The forest was still. Too still. I listened, my pulse thudding in my ears. No whispers. No laughter. No footsteps in the undergrowth. Just silence. Jess clutched my arm. I can't. She gasped for air, her whole body trembling. I pressed my forehead to my knees, sucking in ragged breaths. We were the only ones left. Brian. Gone. Eric. Gone. Sam and Daniel. Vanished before we even understood what was happening. I swallowed the rising bile in my throat. We need to keep moving. We need to. Jess grabbed my wrist. Hard. I turned to her. And saw her staring past me. Her face had drained of all color. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed not to. But I did. And there, just a few feet away, was Eric. Standing. Still. Not breathing hard, not injured, just standing there like he'd been there the whole time. My stomach dropped. Eric? My voice came out hoarse. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head. Too far. A slow, unnatural angle, like his neck was made of liquid. Jess made a strangled sound. I reached out, my fingers trembling. Eric! Then he smiled. And took a step toward us. I scrambled backward, yanking Jess with me. My breath hitched in my throat. Eric, or what looked like Eric, took another step forward. Slow. Deliberate. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. His movements weren't human. Too smooth. Too fluid, like he wasn't walking but gliding. His arms hung limply at his sides. His head was still tilted at that unnatural angle, that twisted grin frozen on his face. Jess dug her nails into my wrist. That's not him, she whispered. I knew. I felt it. Whatever this thing was, it was wearing Eric's skin. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. Eric? It stopped. For a long, awful moment, it just stood there, staring. Smiling. Then, it mimicked my voice. Eric? Not an echo. Not a repetition. It said it exactly like I had. Same tone. Same hesitation. Like it was testing the word. Jess whimpered. The thing took another step. Eric? It repeated, tilting its head the other way. My body locked up. I didn't breathe. It was learning. I grabbed Jess's hand and bolted. Branches clawed at us as we ran, cutting our skin, snagging our clothes. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because behind us, the thing started laughing. And then, in a voice too much like mine, keep running. We ran blindly. Through tangled undergrowth, over fallen logs, down unseen slopes. I didn't know where we were going, only that we had to get away. Jess sobbed beside me, but she kept running. I could hear the way her breath hitched, the way her footsteps stumbled, but neither of us dared stop. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't following us the way it should. No footsteps. No breaking branches. Just the laughter. Coming from everywhere. Too high, too low. Ahead of us. Behind us. Above us. I didn't look. I couldn't. We burst into a clearing and skidded to a stop. Jess doubled over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. I turned in frantic circles. The trees loomed around us, silent and watching. Nothing moved. The laughter had stopped. Jess clutched my arm, her nails digging in. What do we do? What the fuck do we do? I didn't have an answer. We were lost. Hopelessly lost. But then, I saw something through the trees. A structure. Small. Crumbling. A cabin. Jess saw it too. Is that? We have to go. My voice was hoarse. No. It wasn't safety. It wasn't the trailhead. But it was something. And in that moment, something was better than nothing. We ran for it. But as we reached the steps, Jess suddenly stopped. Her entire body went rigid. Wait, she whispered. I froze. The door was open. And inside, a lantern burned. Flickering. Waiting. Like someone was expecting us. The lantern flickered. Warm. Inviting. Wrong. Jess squeezed my wrist so tight it hurt. No. Her voice was barely a breath. We can't go in. But the forest was behind us. The whispers. The laughter. The thing wearing Eric's skin. And the cabin was the only way forward. I swallowed hard. We don't have a choice. I stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood and old dust. The floor creaked beneath my boots. Jess followed, her breath ragged, her fingers still gripping my sleeve. The lantern sat on a wooden table, casting a dull, golden glow. Shadows stretched long against the walls. The place was empty. Except A single backpack sat on the floor by the table. Dirty. Torn. Familiar. I knew it before I even touched it. Sam's. My stomach twisted. He had been here. Jess backed away, shaking her head. We need to go. We need to. A creak above us. My breath hitched. Jess and I both looked up at the same time. A wooden loft stretched above us, lost in shadow. The air felt heavy. Wrong. Another creak. Then, a whisper. Close. Too close. It came from the loft. From the darkness above us. You made it. I recognized the voice. I turned to Jess, my entire body locking up. Her face had gone pale. She had heard it too. And we both knew. It was my voice. The lantern flickered. The door slammed shut. And everything went black.